it's my view at this point, and I've been saying this now for several months, that there is no military solution possible in Iraq at this point. That what you have is a political problem that is going to have to be solved to a large degree by the Iraqis themselves. And so, to my mind, it makes sense for us to now begin a phased withdrawal. Originally, I believed that withdrawal should have started by the end of this year. Now it's unlikely that we can execute that that quickly, but I think early next year, the President should sit down with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and say, how do we do this in a way that causes the least threat to our troops and maintains some semblance of stability, whatever's left in Iraq, but sending a strong signal to the Iraqis that they are going to have to make a determination. Do they want to live as Iraqis in a unified national government? Are they Kurds, Shia, and Sunni first? And force them to make some political decisions about what's going to happen. The second thing I think the President needs to do is to gather up all the regional powers, including Iran and Syria, who to some degree are enjoying watching us flounder there, but will not enjoy millions of refugees if Iraq collapses completely. And say to them, you have to take some ownership over the process as well. The international community, but particularly the Arab states in the surrounding region. And I think if we send a signal that we are not interested in permanent bases, we are not going to attempt to police a civil war, that we can provide support for whatever plans emerge from those discussions. But we are not going to be able to impose our will in Iraq by ourselves. Then we can make some progress. Now keep in mind, and I'll finish up with this, part of the reason I thought this was a bad idea was because at this stage I don't think there are any good options. I think there are bad options and worse options. And there are risks in a phased withdrawal because one can argue that as bad as the situation is now, it could conceivably in the short term get worse. The problem is the alternative, which is to continue on the course that we're on at this point, where what we're seeing typically is when U.S. casualties get high, the administration pulls back troops into the large consolidated bases. The situation deteriorates, we send them back in, and so this month now we're seeing a huge spike in U.S. casualties. That kind of pattern is unsustainable. It's not serving our national security interests, and I think the American people have made it, have at this point made it clear that that is not a burden that they wish to bear.
And is there a role for the Democratic Party if you take one of the houses of Congress to move the administration or the country along?
Well, you know, I think the politics of this election are not only going to embolden the Democrats somewhat belatedly, but I think are also going to cause a lot of soul searching among those Republicans that remain in Congress. I'm confident at this point that the House is going to go Democratic. I think the Senate is going to be close. I know this is a nonpartisan event, but feel free to applaud. And as a consequence, the Democrats are going to be in a position now to, at the very least, hold hearings and provide the kind of oversight that we have not been able to initiate because committee chairmen have essentially refused. That in and of itself would put pressure on the administration to make a different set of decisions. But I think more fundamentally, the albatross around the Republican Party's neck in this election is going to cause them to step back and say, we're going to have to figure out a new way of doing business. And the commission that is co-chaired by James Baker and Lee Hamilton may provide, if not the administration, at least Republicans in Congress, the cover to start rethinking what their position is going to be.
One more question on Iraq, but this also relates to our obligations as citizens. Not too long ago, I went to Tennessee to interview an American soldier who'd been sent to the combat zone 3 times. He went to Afghanistan and then served 2 year-long tours in Iraq. And he made the point that it's a very small percentage of Americans who are bearing the burden and making the sacrifices for this war. Most of us are free to go about our daily business. You can go shopping, go to the mall, do whatever it is you need to do. And it's only a tiny sliver of the population that's enduring the suffering. That seems fundamentally unfair, and I'd like to know what your views are about that.
Well, I think it raises 2 points. The first and most immediate point is that, in fact, the burden of this war has been borne by a small segment of the population, and to some degree, that's the only reason that we went in there in the first place. Had there been a draft, we would not have launched this war. I think that's fair to say. In fact, one could argue that we wouldn't even need a universal draft. If there was a rule that all members of Congress's children were eligible for the draft, there would not have been. We would not have gone in. We can't have that conversation in the midst of war. It's too volatile for us to start thinking about how are we structuring our military and what does an all-voluntary force mean relative to a universal service requirement. But I think it's one that we should initiate in times where we can be more reflective and less passionate.
But isn't it likely in a time when we can be more reflective, meaning a time when we're not at war, that we won't have that conversation?
Well, I would like to start a conversation, and this brings me to, I guess, the larger point, about what citizenship means and what are our obligations to each other, and how do we create a stronger link between the decision-making in Washington and the daily experience of people's lives. And this is not just true in foreign policy. The same is true with respect to the economy. This week we saw the Dow go over 12,000 points. If you're walking down Wall Street, the economy looks great. If you go to Decatur, Illinois, or Galesburg, Illinois, or Peoria, Illinois, the economy looks very different. And the reason is because the top 1% has seen their incomes rise about 500% over the last decade, and the average working stiff has seen their wages and salaries flatlined. The top 1% is much more likely to participate politically than the other 99%. And so we have these distortions in terms of how decisions are made in Washington. I don't have a magic solution to it, but part of the reason I wrote this book was to suggest that there have to be ways for us to re-engage the citizenry around the project of American renewal, both domestically and internationally. And the first step in that, I think, is to restore some mechanism for honest debate. Because the problem with the Iraq War was the debate was dishonest. The problem with our foreign policy right now is that we have posed the problem as either we're belligerent and the military is the only solution to any national security threats that we have, or conversely that we have this vague multilateralism, kumbaya approach. At least that's how it's characterized in the press and in our politics.